What happens when the invisible daughter walks across the graduation stage and shocks everyone with a six-figure business they never knew existed? My parents thought they were investing in the wrong daughter. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. I was always invisible. My sister was their everything, until one moment flipped it all. My name is Isabella Carter, but everyone calls me Izzy. I'm 24 3 weeks away from graduating with honors from one of the most prestigious universities in the country. But this story isn't about my graduation. It's about the 24 years it took to get here and the family that never saw me coming. Let me take you back to where it all started. Salem, Oregon, a quiet suburban neighborhood where the lawns are always perfect and the secrets are buried deep. My parents, Derek and Sandra Carter, are good people. I want to make that clear. They're not monsters. They're not abusive. They're just blind. And sometimes blindness cuts deeper than cruelty. I have a sister, Madison. She's 2 years younger than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was everything I wasn't. Golden blonde hair that caught the light just right, a smile that could charm anyone, and this natural confidence that filled every room she entered. Madison was the debate champion, the straight A student, the one who made friends effortlessly. And then there was me. Brown hair that never quite sat right quiet by nature, preferring books to parties. I wasn't ugly, wasn't stupid, wasn't a troublemaker. I was just ordinary. And in a family that had already found their star, ordinary wasn't enough to shine. The first time I really understood my place in our family hierarchy was Christmas morning when I was 12. Madison had been begging for this expensive art set for months. Professional grade pencils, paints, canvases, the works. It cost almost $300. I had asked for a simple laptop, nothing fancy, just something to help with my school projects. Christmas morning came. Madison tore through her presents, squealing with delight as she unwrapped that art set piece by beautiful piece. When she was done, there was a mountain of wrapping paper around her, and she was glowing with joy. My turn came next. I unwrapped a used laptop, clearly refurbished with a crack running down the corner of the screen. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful. But when I looked at my parents, I saw something in their eyes that I'd never noticed before. They were watching Madison, not me. Even in my moment, they were still watching her. Later that evening, I overheard my mom talking to my aunt on the phone. "Well, Madison's so artistic," she was saying. "We really wanted to nurture her talent. Izzy's more practical, she doesn't need as much." Doesn't need as much. Those 4 words would echo in my head for years. The pattern continued through high school. When Madison joined the debate team, both my parents attended every single competition, drove her to practices, helped her research topics. When I made the honor roll 4 years in a row, it was acknowledged with a quick, "good job," over dinner. Madison's graduation party was planned for months. Relatives flew in from 3 different states. They rented a hall, hired a caterer, made a slideshow of her achievements that ran for 20 minutes. When my graduation came 2 years later, we had cake in the backyard with immediate family only. But the moment that really broke something inside me happened during my senior year. I had been accepted to a summer program at Stanford, a competitive writing workshop that only took 30 students nationwide. I was so proud, so excited to tell them. I burst into the kitchen where my parents were sitting with Madison, who was stressed about her upcoming SATs. "Mom, Dad, I got in," I said, waving the acceptance letter. "The Stanford program, they're only taking 30 kids from the entire country." My mom looked up, briefly smiled, and said, "That's nice, honey." Then she immediately turned back to Madison. "Okay, so let's go over these practice problems one more time." I stood there for a moment, holding that letter, feeling like I was disappearing right in front of them. But it was what happened next that really crushed me. Madison looked stressed, overwhelmed by the SAT prep. She started crying, saying she couldn't handle the pressure. And my mother, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around Madison and said, "Oh, sweetheart, don't worry. We'll get you a tutor. We'll do whatever it takes." Then she looked at me. still standing there with my acceptance letter, and said something I'll never forget. Madison needs it more. You're tougher, Izzy. You can handle things on your own. You're tougher. You can handle things on your own. It was meant as a compliment, I think. But all I heard was, you don't need us. You don't deserve our attention. You're not worth the effort. That night, I sat in my room staring at that Stanford acceptance letter, and I made a decision that would change everything. If they thought I was tough enough to handle things on my own, then that's exactly what I would do. But I wouldn't just survive, I would thrive. I would become everything they never saw coming. But becoming everything they never saw coming started with the biggest betrayal of my life. Senior year brought college applications, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about something. I had my heart set on Northview University. It's this incredible school in Northern California known for its business program and entrepreneurship opportunities. The campus is beautiful, the professors are world-class, and getting in there would change everything for me. I spent months crafting my application. I wrote and rewrote my essays until they were perfect. I took the SATs 3 times to get the score I wanted. I poured my heart into every single page because I knew this was my shot at a future that would finally make them proud. Madison, meanwhile, applied almost as an afterthought. She had been so focused on her social life and extracurriculars that college applications felt like just another item on her to-do list. But Madison has always been one of those people that things just work out for, March 15th, acceptance letters, day. I remember it so clearly because it was the first time in years that I felt like Madison and I were truly equals. Both of us, nervous, both of us, waiting for news that would shape our futures. My letter came first. Thick envelope, the good kind. I opened it with shaking hands, and there it was. Congratulations, Isabella. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Northview University. I screamed, actually screamed with joy. Madison came running downstairs, and when I told her, she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. For that one moment, it felt like we were just sisters sharing this incredible moment together. Her letter came 2 hours later. Same thick envelope, same acceptance. That evening, my parents suggested we all go out to celebrate. Olive Garden, nothing fancy, but it felt special because it was for both of us. For once, we were both the stars of the show. We ordered appetizers, talked about college life, about roommates and classes, and football games. My dad even raised a toast to our daughters, both heading to the same incredible university. We couldn't be prouder. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. I felt equal. I felt like I mattered. But then came dessert. And with dessert came the conversation that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. So, my mom said, her voice taking on that tone she used when she had something important to discuss. We need to talk about the practical side of things. College is expensive, and we want to make sure we handle this the right way. I nodded, expecting them to outline some kind of payment plan, maybe talk about student loans or work-study programs. We've been saving for years, my dad continued, and we're so proud that we can send one of you to Northview debt-free. One of you. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe he just misspoke. What do you mean, one of us? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. My parents exchanged a look. One of those married couple looks where they have an entire conversation without saying a word. Well, honey, my mom said gently, we have enough saved to cover tuition, room, and board for 4 years, but not for both of you. We never expected you'd both get into the same school. The restaurant suddenly felt too loud, too bright. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. So what does that mean? Madison asked. She looked as confused as I felt. My dad cleared his throat. It means we need to make a choice, and we've decided that Madison should be the one to go. The world stopped. Just completely stopped. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to say he was joking. But he just sat there looking uncomfortable, but resolved. Why, the word came out as barely a whisper. Well, my mom said Madison's been more focused on her social development, her networking skills. College is really about making connections, and that's where Madison naturally excels. You're more independent, more self sufficient. We think you'll find a way to make it work regardless. Independent, self sufficient. There were those words again, dressed up as compliments, but delivered like a death sentence. But we have the same grades, I said, my voice getting stronger. I scored higher on the SATs. I've been talking about Northview for 2 years. This isn't about grades, sweetheart, my dad said, and then he said the words that would replay in my mind for years to come. We're investing where we'll see the best return. Investing where they'll see the best return, like I was a stock portfolio, like my entire future was just a financial calculation. Madison looked mortified. Mom, Dad, that's not fair. Izzy deserves this just as much as I do. I loved her for saying that. Even in that moment, when she could have stayed quiet and taken everything they were offering, she stood up for me. But it didn't change anything. Life isn't always fair, girls, my mom said. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions. Izzy, you're resourceful. You'll figure out a way to get your education. You always do. I sat there staring at my half-eaten tiramisu, feeling like everything inside me was crumbling. They had made their choice. After 18 years of watching them choose Madison over and over again, they had finally made the ultimate choice. And I wasn't it. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded and said, okay. But inside, something fundamental shifted. The last tiny part of me that still hoped they might see me, might value me, might love me the same way they loved Madison died right there at that table. As we drove home in silence, I made another decision. If they weren't going to invest in me, I would invest in myself. And I would show them exactly what kind of return they had missed out on. The betrayal was complete. But my real story was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left just an empty shell. I couldn't face my parents at breakfast, couldn't pretend everything was normal. So I did what I always did when the world felt too heavy to bear alone. I drove to Grandma Rosa's house. Grandma Rosa is my dad's mother, and she's the only person in my family who has ever really seen me. She's this tiny, fierce woman with silver hair and eyes that miss nothing. She immigrated from Mexico when she was 19, built a life from nothing, and raised 4 kids while working 2 jobs. If anyone understood what it meant to fight for your dreams, it was her. I found her in her garden, tending to her tomatoes like she did every morning. When she saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just opened her arms and I fell into them like I was 5 years old again. Mija, she said, holding me tight. What did they do now? I told her everything. The dinner, the choice, the way they talked about me like I was just a business decision that hadn't worked out. I told her about feeling invisible, about being the daughter they could live without. She listened without interrupting, her weathered hands stroking my hair. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You know, she finally said, when I first came to this country, people told me I would never amount to anything. I was too short, too poor, too foreign. They couldn't see past what I wasn't to see what I was. She pulled back and looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. Your parents, they love you, Isabella. But love and vision, they're not the same thing. They see Madison, and they see themselves, their hopes, their dreams reflected back. But you, Mija, you're something different. You're something they don't understand yet. But what if they're right? I whispered. What if I'm not worth investing in? She took my face in her hands and her voice became fierce. Their blind spots don't define your vision. You hear me? What they can't see doesn't make it less real. She stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. You want to go to that university? more than anything, then you go. Not because they're paying for it, not because they believe in you, but because you believe in you. And when you walk across that stage 4 years from now, it won't be their victory. It will be yours. Something ignited in my chest, a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly, but something stronger. Determination. I drove home that day with my mind racing. If I was going to do this, I needed a plan. Not just any plan, but a survival mission that would get me through 4 years at one of the most expensive universities in the country. I locked myself in my room and started researching. Scholarships, grants, work-study programs, student loans. I made spreadsheets, calculated budgets, mapped out every possible source of funding. I applied for scholarships. I barely qualified for wrote essays until my fingers cramped, filled out financial aid forms until my eyes burned. The Northview Merit Scholarship, the First Generation College Student Grant, the Women in Business Leadership Award, the Academic Excellence Scholarship. I applied for everything, even the ones with a 1% acceptance rate. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Madison was asleep in her room planning her worry-free college experience, I was hunched over my laptop fighting for mine. I calculated that if I could get partial scholarships totaling $15,000, work 20 hours a week during school and take out student loans for the rest, I could just barely make it work. It would mean living off ramen noodles and working weekends, but it was possible. The hardest part was the essays. Every scholarship application asked the same question in different ways. Why do you deserve this? Why should we invest in you? How do you explain to strangers that your own family doesn't think you're worth investing in? How do you turn that into a strength instead of a weakness? I rewrote my personal statement 17 times. 17. Because every version sounded either too bitter or too pathetic. I didn't want pity. I wanted recognition. Finally, I found the right words. I am applying for this scholarship, not because I need someone to believe in me, but because I already believe in myself. I've learned that the most powerful person in the room isn't the one everyone expects to succeed, but the one who succeeds despite everyone's expectations. 3 weeks later, the acceptances started rolling in. Small scholarships, at first 500 here, 1,000 there. But then bigger ones, the Women in Business Leadership Award for 2,500, the Academic Excellence Scholarship for 5,000. By May, I had pieced together a puzzle of funding that would cover almost half my expenses. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to make the dream possible. The day I got my financial aid letter from Northview confirming my work-study placement and loan approvals, I sat in my car in the school parking lot and cried. Not sad tears, but relieved, grateful, determined tears. I was going to college. Not because my parents were paying for it, not because anyone had handed it to me, but because I had fought for it, earned it, made it happen myself. That night at dinner, when my parents were discussing Madison's dorm preferences and meal plans, I cleared my throat. I have some news, I said. I'll be attending Northview too. They looked at me like I had announced I was moving to Mars. Honey, my mom said gently, we already discussed this. You can't afford it, I interrupted. But I can. I've got scholarships, financial aid, and a work-study job. I'll be there in the fall. The silence at the table was deafening. Madison looked proud. My parents looked stunned. Isabella, my dad said slowly, that's a lot of debt to take on. Are you sure this is wise? I met his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. I'm investing where I'll see the best return, I said, throwing his own words back at him. And I believe in my investment. That summer, while Madison got care packages and shopping trips for her dorm room, I worked 2 jobs and saved every penny. I was scared, exhausted, and completely on my own, but I had never felt more alive. Freshman year at Northview was like jumping into ice-cold water. Shocking, overwhelming, and a constant reminder that I was completely out of my depth. While Madison moved into her spacious dorm room in the newest building on campus, complete with a mini fridge my parents had bought her, and enough decorations to fill a small apartment, I was moving into a rundown house 20 minutes off campus with three complete strangers. The house was old, drafty, and smelled faintly of whatever the previous tenants had been cooking for the past decade. My room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a desk, but the rent was $300 a month, which was all I could afford. My roommates were a mixed bag. There was Jake, a junior who spent most of his time playing video games and leaving dirty dishes in the sink. Sarah, a sophomore who seemed to survive entirely on energy drinks and stress. And then there was Kayla. Kayla was a senior working her way through school just like me. She was studying nursing, which meant she was either at class at the hospital doing clinicals or passed out from exhaustion. But from day one, she looked out for me in ways that reminded me of Grandma Rosa. First rule of being broke in college, she told me on my second day, handing me a container of homemade pasta. We take care of each other. Eat this. You look like you haven't had a real meal in weeks. She wasn't wrong. Between tuition rent and textbooks, food had become a luxury I couldn't always afford. My days started at 5 in the morning. I'd grab a quick shower, down a cup of coffee that was more water than coffee, and head to my first job at the campus dining hall. I spent 3 hours serving breakfast to students who looked like they'd never worried about money a day in their lives. Then I'd rush to classes, trying to stay awake and take notes while my feet ached from standing all morning. After classes, I had exactly 30 minutes to grab a snack and head to my second job at the library. 4 hours of shelving books, helping students with research, and trying to squeeze in my own studying during the quiet moments. By the time I got home each night, it was usually past 10. I'd heat up whatever cheap meal I could throw together, try to get through my homework, and fall asleep at my desk more often than in my bed. The exhaustion was bone deep, the kind that makes you question everything you're doing. But every morning, I'd wake up and do it again. It was during one of those late-night library shifts that I met Mason Patel. I was restocking the economics section when I noticed someone had been sitting at the same table for hours, surrounded by textbooks and what looked like financial aid paperwork. When I walked by to pick up some books, I heard him quietly curse under his breath. "You okay?" I asked. He looked up, and I saw my own exhaustion reflected in his eyes. Dark circles, the slightly glazed look of someone running on too little sleep and too much caffeine. "Just trying to figure out how to pay for next semester," he said with a tired smile. "You know how it is." Actually, I did know exactly how it was. "Scholarship, kid?" I asked. "Scholarship, financial aid, work study, and still not enough." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Same boat. I'm Izzy, Mason, and I'm pretty sure we're both slowly drowning in this boat." That was the beginning of a friendship that would save my sanity. Mason was a sophomore studying business like me, and he understood the unique challenges of trying to get a world-class education when you can barely afford to eat. We started studying together, sharing textbooks, and splitting the cost of things like printing and supplies. More importantly, we kept each other going when the weight of it all felt too heavy. "You know what I realized," Mason said one evening as we sat in the library, both of us struggling to stay awake over our accounting homework. "Everyone else here is playing checkers, but we're playing chess." "What do you mean?" "They're thinking one move ahead. Pass the class, get the grade, move on. But we have to think 5 moves ahead. How does this class connect to our major? How does our major connect to career opportunities? How do we network when we can't afford to join clubs or go to expensive events?" He was right. While other students could afford to stumble through college changing majors and taking gap years, we had to be strategic about everything. The contrast with Madison's college experience was painful and impossible to ignore. Every time she called home, which was at least 3 times a week, I could hear the difference in our parents' voices. They were interested in every detail of her life. Her classes, her friends, her social activities. Madison joined a sorority, went to football games, and studied abroad one semester. She called me sometimes, and I could hear the worry in her voice when she realized how different our experiences were. Izzy, are you eating enough? She'd ask. You sound tired. I'm fine, I'd always say, because what was the alternative? Tell her that some weeks I chose between buying groceries and buying textbooks, that I hadn't been to a single social event because I was either working or too exhausted to care. Meanwhile, my parents sent Madison care packages every month. Snacks, gift cards, money for emergencies that seemed to happen with suspicious frequency. They'd post pictures on Facebook of the packages they were sending with captions like, supporting our college girl. I tried not to let it bother me. I really did, but it's hard to pretend you don't notice when your absence from those posts is so obvious it might as well be highlighted in neon. The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion or even the financial stress. It was the loneliness. Being surrounded by thousands of students, but feeling completely isolated by your circumstances. But then there were moments that reminded me why I was doing this. Like when Kayla would leave leftovers in the fridge with a note that said, for the hardest working person I know. Or when Mason and I would ace an exam we'd studied for together, and we'd celebrate with dollar menu burgers and dream about the futures we were building. There was one night, about halfway through freshman year, when everything felt impossible. I'd been sick with the flu, but couldn't afford to take time off work. I was behind on assignments, my bank account was overdrawn, and I'd just gotten a letter saying one of my scholarships might not be renewed. I was sitting on my bed, surrounded by bills and homework, when Kayla knocked on my door. You look like hell, she said, not unkindly. Feel like it too. She sat down next to me and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you know what I see when I look at you? I shook my head. I see someone who's going to graduate with skills that these other kids will never have. They're learning how to study and take tests. You're learning how to survive, how to work under pressure, how to make something from nothing. That's not something you can teach in a classroom. She was right. Every challenge I faced was teaching me something valuable. Every late night was building my endurance. Every financial crisis was sharpening my problem-solving skills. By the end of freshman year, I had maintained a 3.8 GPA while working 40 hours a week. I had learned to live on less than $1,000 a month. I had discovered that I was capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined. Madison finished her freshman year with good grades too, but she also finished with the same assumptions about the world she'd started with. That things would work out, that someone would always be there to catch her if she fell, that success was just a matter of showing up. I finished my freshman year knowing that the only person who would catch me was me. And somehow, that made me feel more powerful than any trust fund ever could. The climb was brutal, but I was getting stronger with every step. Sophomore year changed everything, not because my circumstances got easier, but because I finally stopped just surviving and started thriving. It happened by accident, the way most life-changing moments do. I was sitting in my business strategy class, half listening to a lecture about market analysis, when Professor Martinez mentioned something called the Northview Innovation Incubator. It's a program where students can develop real business ideas with real funding and real mentorship, he said. Applications are due next Friday. It's competitive, but if you have a viable business concept, I encourage you to apply. After class, Mason and I walked to the library together, both of us lost in thought. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? He asked. That we should apply to something we know nothing about with a business idea we don't have? Exactly. Here's the thing about being broke in college, you develop a different relationship with risk. When you have nothing to lose, you're willing to try anything that might change your situation. That night, instead of doing my regular homework, I researched the incubator program. It was legitimate. They provided workspace mentorship and up to $5,000 in seed funding for promising student ventures. The catch, you had to have a real business plan, not just an idea. I thought about all the small businesses I'd encountered through my various jobs. The corner cafe that never seemed to have their inventory right, the local bookstore that was still using a paper ledger system, the family restaurant that had amazing food but couldn't figure out online ordering. These weren't big corporate problems. They were small business problems that required practical, affordable solutions. By 3 in the morning, I had the outline of my business plan, Isabella Carter Consulting. a freelance consultancy focused on helping small businesses with basic operations management, inventory systems, and digital transitions. The application process was intense. A 10-page business plan, financial projections, market analysis, and a presentation to a panel of professors and local business leaders. When I walked into that presentation room 2 weeks later, I was the only sophomore there. Everyone else was a junior or senior with way more business experience than me. But I had something they didn't: real-world perspective from actually working in these types of businesses. Ms. Carter, one of the panelists, said, "Your projected revenue seems quite ambitious for a student-run consultancy. What makes you think small businesses will pay you for advice when they could hire an established firm? Because established firms don't understand their problems," I said, probably more confidently than I felt. "A big consulting company is going to charge them $50,000 to implement a system they don't need. I'm going to charge them $500 to fix the system they already have." 2 weeks later, I got the acceptance email. I was in. The incubator was like nothing I'd ever experienced. We had actual office space computers, business mentors who had built real companies. For the first time in my college career, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. My mentor was Dr. Elaine Park, a professor in the business school who had built and sold 2 companies before coming to academia. She was tough, demanding, and absolutely brilliant. "Isabella," she said, during our first meeting, "you have good instincts, but instincts without execution are just wishful thinking. If you want this to work, you need to start treating it like a real business, not a school project." She was right. I started reaching out to local businesses, offering free consultations to build my portfolio. My first client was a family-owned bakery that was struggling with their ordering system. I spent a weekend redesigning their inventory tracking and saved them over $2,000 in waste over the next month. Word spread. Small businesses started calling me directly. I was getting paid to solve problems, and I was good at it. By the end of sophomore year, Isabella Carter Consulting had 12 regular clients and was generating about $1,500 a month in revenue. It wasn't huge money, but it was enough to reduce my work-study hours and focus more on growing the business. Dr. Park started introducing me to bigger opportunities: business plan competitions, entrepreneurship conferences, grant opportunities I never would have known about otherwise. "You need to think bigger, Isabella," she told me. "This isn't just a college side hustle. This could be a real company." A junior year, she encouraged me to apply for the California Emerging Entrepreneurs Grant, a statewide competition that provided funding and resources to promising young business owners. The application process took months. Financial statements, growth projections, letters of recommendation, video presentations. I was competing against hundreds of other applicants from universities across the state. The day of the final presentation, I took the train to Sacramento with a folder full of client testimonials and a business plan I'd rewritten 17 times. I was nervous, but excited. This felt like the biggest opportunity of my life. The presentation went well, really well. I talked about the gap in the market for affordable business consulting, showed concrete results from my existing clients, and outlined a plan for scaling the business statewide. 3 weeks later, I got the call. I had won $25,000 in grant funding plus a year of mentorship from established business leaders. I was sitting in the library when I got the news, and I literally started crying right there at my desk. Mason, who was studying across from me, looked panicked. "What's wrong? Did someone die?" "I won," I whispered. "I actually won." The grant announcement was published in the local newspaper and picked up by several business publications. "Local college student wins prestigious entrepreneurship grant" was the headline in the Sacramento Business Journal. It was the first time my name had ever appeared in a newspaper, the first time anyone outside my immediate circle had recognized my work. I felt like I was finally becoming the person I'd always known I could be. I called Grandma Rosa first. She cried. Then I called Kayla, who screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Mason bought a bottle of cheap champagne and we celebrated in our terrible off-campus house like we'd just won the lottery. Finally, I called home. My parents were having dinner, and Madison was there visiting for the weekend. "Mom, Dad, I have some news," I said, trying to contain my excitement. "I won a major business grant, $25,000. It's going to be in the newspaper and everything." There was a pause. Then my mom said, "That's nice, honey. Madison, tell your sister about your internship." "That's nice, honey." 4 words that deflated 2 years of work in an instant. Madison tried to redirect the conversation back to my news. Bless her heart, but the moment was already gone. They asked a few polite questions, but I could tell they weren't really listening. It was like I was describing a hobby, not a legitimate business achievement. After I hung up, I sat in my room staring at the grant letter, feeling empty despite the incredible news I'd just received. But then, something interesting happened. Instead of the old, familiar pain of not being seen by them, I felt something different. I felt free. For the first time in my life, their approval wasn't the prize I was chasing. Their recognition wasn't what made my achievements real. I had built something meaningful, something valuable, something entirely my own. The newspaper article came out the following week. Dr. Park framed it and put it on her office wall. Grandma Rosa made copies and sent them to every relative she could think of. Local business owners started reaching out to me directly. My parents never mentioned it. But you know what? It didn't matter anymore. I was no longer the invisible daughter fighting for scraps of attention. I was Isabella Carter, entrepreneur grant winner, business owner. And I was just getting started. The call came at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. I was up late working on a client proposal when my phone rang. Madison's name flashed on the screen, which was unusual. We texted occasionally, but we rarely called each other anymore. When we did talk, it was usually during family dinners when we were both home. "Izzy." Her voice was thick with tears. "I'm sorry to call so late. I didn't know who else to call." I set down my laptop. "What's wrong?" "Everything," she whispered. "Everything is wrong, and I don't know what to do." Madison had always been the one with the plan. High school to college, to sorority, to internship, to perfect job, to perfect life. But sitting in her dorm room at 2 in the morning, crying into the phone, she sounded lost in a way I'd never heard before. "Can you come over? I know it's late, but I need someone to talk to." 20 minutes later, I was standing outside her dorm room. When she opened the door, I barely recognized her. Madison had always been put together, even in crisis. But this version of my sister had dark circles under her eyes, unwashed hair, and the hollow look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. Her room, usually magazine perfect, was chaos. Papers everywhere. Empty. Coffee cups. Textbooks stacked haphazardly on every surface. "Senior thesis," she said, following my gaze. "It's due in 6 weeks, and I have nothing. Nothing." I sat down on her bed, moving aside a pile of research that didn't seem to relate to anything coherent. "What's your topics?" "That's the problem. I don't have one." "Not really. I chose something about marketing strategies in social media, but every time I sit down to write, I realize I have nothing original to say. It's all been done before and better." She collapsed into her desk chair, looking defeated. "But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that I don't care. I'm supposed to graduate in 2 months, and I don't care about my thesis. I don't care about my major, and I have no idea what I want to do with my life." This was not the Madison I knew. The Madison I knew had her next 5 years planned out in color-coded spreadsheets. "What about your internship applications, the marketing firms you were excited about?" She laughed, but it was bitter. "I didn't get any of them. Any of them, Izzy. Do you know how humiliating it is to be rejected by every single company you apply to?" I didn't know what to say. Madison had never failed at anything before. Not really. She'd always been the golden child who succeeded effortlessly at everything she tried. I keep thinking about what Dad said at that dinner junior year. about investing where they'd see the best return. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. What if they were wrong? What if I'm not worth the investment either? Something twisted in my chest. After years of feeling like the disappointment, hearing Madison echo those same fears was heartbreaking. Madison, that's not... No, let me finish, she said, her voice getting stronger. I need to say this. I've been thinking about it for months, and I need to say it out loud. She took a shaky breath. I thought they were right about you. All those years, I thought Mom and Dad could see something I couldn't. That you were tougher, more independent, that you didn't need the same support I did. I thought their favoritism was justified because I was more fragile, more in need of help. The words hung in the air between us. But I was wrong. God, Izzy, I was so wrong. You weren't tougher. You were just forced to be tough. You didn't need less support. You just learned to live without it. And while I was getting all their attention and resources, you were building something real. She gestured at the newspaper clipping on her bulletin board, the article about my grant win that our parents had barely acknowledged. Look at what you've accomplished. You built a business from nothing. You won a statewide competition. You're making real money solving real problems. And me? I can't even write a thesis about something I supposedly studied for 4 years. I was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd said. This conversation we should have had years ago was finally happening, and it felt both devastating and healing at the same time. Madison, I said carefully, our parents loving you more doesn't make you weak, and their neglect didn't make me strong. We both got damaged by their favoritism, just in different ways. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know that now, but knowing it doesn't fix the fact that I have no idea who I am outside of being their favorite daughter. Take that away, and what's left? It was a question I'd been asking myself in reverse for years. Who was I if I wasn't the overlooked daughter? Who was Madison if she wasn't the golden child? Can I tell you something? I said. You called me at 2 a.m. because you needed help. Not Mom, not Dad. Me. That tells me you know exactly who I am, even if they don't. She smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. You're right. I did call you because somewhere along the way I figured out that you're the strongest person I know. We talked until sunrise, about the impossible standards she'd been trying to live up to, about the loneliness of being expected to be perfect, about how she'd watched me succeed from a distance and felt proud and ashamed at the same time. I want to help with your thesis, I said as the sun started coming through her window. Not because I feel obligated to, but because I want to. Because you're my sister, and sisters help each other. You would do that, even after everything. Madison, you're not responsible for how our parents treated me. And I'm not going to punish you for their mistakes. We spent the next 3 weeks working together. I helped her find a thesis topic that actually interested her, the psychological impact of social media on young entrepreneurs. It combined her marketing background with real research, and for the first time in months, she seemed excited about school again. But more than that, we rebuilt our relationship. We talked about our childhood, about the dynamics that had driven us apart, about the future we both wanted to build. You know what's funny? Madison said one evening as we worked on her research in the library. All these years, I thought I was the successful sister. But you're the one who actually knows how to succeed. What do you mean? I know how to meet expectations. You know how to exceed them. I know how to follow a path someone else laid out. You know how to create your own path. Those are completely different skills. She was right. The favoritism that had given her every advantage had also trapped her in a narrow definition of success. The neglect that had forced me to be self-reliant had also given me the freedom to become whoever I wanted to be. Madison finished her thesis on time and got an A-. Not perfect, but good enough. And more importantly, it was hers. She'd done the work, struggled through the challenges, and earned the result. As we packed up her dorm room at the end of senior year, she turned to me with a serious expression. Izzy, I need you to know something. Whatever happens at graduation, Whatever mom and dad do or don't do, I see you. I see everything you've accomplished, and I'm proud to be your sister. It was the recognition I'd been craving my entire life, but it was coming from the right person for the right reasons. Not because I'd finally earned it, but because she'd finally learned to see clearly. I'm proud to be your sister too, I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it completely. The golden child and the overlooked daughter had finally found their way back to each other. But our real test was still coming. Graduation was 3 weeks away. 2 weeks before graduation, I got an email that changed everything. I was sitting in Dr. Park's office going over final details for a client presentation when my phone buzzed. The subject line read, Northview University Commencement Special Recognition. Excuse me for just a second, I said, opening the email. Dear Ms. Carter, it began, the Faculty Selection Committee has chosen you to receive the Dean's Award for Exemplary Achievement at this year's commencement ceremony. This honor recognizes one graduating student who has demonstrated exceptional leadership, innovation, and service both within the university and the broader community. I read it twice before the words sank in. Dr. Park, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think I just got selected for some kind of graduation award. She looked over my shoulder at the email and her face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen from her. Isabella, this is huge. The Dean's Award isn't just any recognition. It's the most prestigious honor they give to undergraduates. You have to give a speech at graduation. A speech at graduation, in front of thousands of people. I can't do that, I said, panic setting in. I can't give a speech in front of all those people. Yes, you can, Dr. Park said firmly. You've presented to business leaders, competed in statewide competitions, built a company from scratch. You can absolutely do this. The next 2 weeks were a blur of speech writing practice sessions and trying to process the fact that I would be one of the featured speakers at my own graduation. Meanwhile, my family was in full preparation mode for Madison's big day. My parents had booked a fancy restaurant for after the ceremony, invited extended family, and spent weeks coordinating who would sit where and who would take pictures with whom. The conversations at home were all about Madison, what she would wear under her gown, which relatives were driving the farthest to see her graduate, what her post-graduation plans were. We're so proud, my mom kept saying. Our little girl graduating from Northview University. I wanted to point out that their other little girl was also graduating from Northview University, but I'd long since stopped expecting them to see beyond Madison's spotlight. The Thursday before graduation, I was at home packing when my phone rang. Grandma Rosa. Mija, I have something for you. Can you come over? I found her in her living room, holding a white box tied with a silver ribbon. Sit down, she said, patting the couch next to her. I opened the box carefully, and inside was the most beautiful graduation stole I'd ever seen. It was deep purple, with gold embroidery, but it wasn't the colors that took my breath away. It was the words stitched along the length of the fabric in elegant script. They were wrong. You rose anyway. I started crying immediately. Grandma, I can't wear this. It's too what? Too true. Her eyes were fierce. Isabella, you have spent your entire life making yourself smaller so other people would feel comfortable. Your graduation day is not the day to start shrinking. She helped me drape it over my shoulders. This is who you are. The woman who rose anyway. The woman who built something beautiful from nothing. The woman who refused to let anyone else's blindness dim her light. I looked at myself in her hallway mirror wearing that stole, and for the first time in my life, I saw what Grandma Rosa had always seen. Not the overlooked daughter, not the one who wasn't worth the investment, but someone strong and capable, and worthy of recognition. Graduation morning arrived with perfect California sunshine. The ceremony was being held in Northview's main quad with thousands of white chairs arranged in perfect rows, facing a temporary stage. My parents spent the morning fussing over Madison, taking pictures, adjusting her cap, making sure she had everything she needed. I got ready quietly in my room, put on Grandma Rosa's stole, and met them downstairs. Oh, that's a nice stole, honey. My mom said absently, not really looking at me. Madison, are you ready? We don't want to be late. The graduates were separated from families during the processional, so I found myself in line with hundreds of other students, all of us wearing identical caps and gowns. Madison was somewhere behind me in the alphabetical lineup, but I couldn't see her. As we walked across campus toward the ceremony, I felt strangely calm. This was it. The moment 4 years of struggle and sacrifice had been leading toward. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. Opening remarks, a keynote speaker who talked about the future of leadership, the presentation of honorary degrees. My parents, sitting somewhere in the sea of families, were probably taking pictures of Madison and checking their watches for when her name would be called. Then came the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Ladies and gentlemen, the dean's voice boomed across the quad. It is now my honor to present our recipient of this year's Dean's Award for Exemplary Achievement. This recognition goes to a student who has not only excelled academically, but has demonstrated remarkable leadership, innovation, and service to our community. I could feel my heart pounding as I stood up from my seat in the front row. This year's recipient has built a successful business while maintaining a 3.9 GPA, won statewide recognition for entrepreneurial excellence, and embodied the values of determination and service that Northview University strives to instill in all our graduates. I was walking toward the stage now, my legs somehow steady despite my racing pulse. Please join me in congratulating Isabella Carter. The applause was thunderous, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. As I climbed the steps to the stage, I caught a glimpse of the audience, thousands of people who had just heard my name announced as the most distinguished graduate of my class. Somewhere in that crowd, my parents were probably still looking around, wondering if they'd heard correctly. Somewhere in that crowd, Madison was probably clapping harder than anyone else. But as I reached the podium and looked out at all those faces, I realized something profound. This moment wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about proving my worth to parents who had never learned to see it. It wasn't about finally getting the recognition I'd been craving my entire life. This moment was about honoring the journey, honoring the girl who had been told she was tough enough to handle things on her own and who had taken that burden and turned it into her greatest strength. I adjusted the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and began to speak. 4 years ago, I came to Northview University with nothing but student loan scholarships and a determination to prove that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless. The quad was completely silent now. Today, I stand before you, not as someone who overcame obstacles, but as someone who learned that obstacles are often just opportunities in disguise. Every closed door taught me to build my own entrance. Every no taught me to create my own yes. Every moment I felt invisible taught me that the most powerful person in the room isn't the one everyone expects to succeed, but the one who succeeds despite everyone's expectations. I could see my grandmother in the crowd, now tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her heart. To my fellow graduates, especially those of you who have had to fight for every opportunity, who have worked multiple jobs to pay for your education, who have been told you're not worth the investment, they were wrong. You rose anyway. And that rising is not just your victory. It's your gift to the world. The applause was deafening now, but I could barely hear it over the sound of my own transformation. The invisible daughter was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that the most important recognition is the kind you give yourself. As I walked off the stage, diploma in hand, I caught sight of my parents in the crowd. They were sitting completely still, mouths open, looking like they were seeing me for the very first time. And maybe they were, but the speech was just the beginning. What happened next was something I never could have anticipated. As I finished speaking and started to step away from the podium, Dean Richardson approached the microphone. I assumed he was going to thank me and move on to the next part of the ceremony. Instead, he gestured for me to stay beside him. Before Ms. Carter leaves the stage, he said, his voice carrying across the silent quad. I believe our audience deserves to understand the full scope of what she has accomplished during her time at Northview University. I looked at him, confused. This wasn't part of the plan we'd discussed. Isabella Carter came to Northview University 4 years ago as a completely self-funded student. No family financial support, no trust fund, no safety net. She worked her way through college with a combination of scholarships. She earned student loans and multiple part-time jobs. My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected him to reveal those details so publicly. Despite working 40 hours a week to pay for her education, Ms. Carter graduated today with a perfect 4.0 GPA summa cum laude and as a member of the prestigious Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society. The crowd murmured with appreciation, but Dean Richardson wasn't finished. 3 years ago, Ms. Carter founded Isabella Carter Consulting, a business management consultancy focused on helping small businesses optimize their operations. That company, which she built while attending classes full-time, now generates over $100,000 in annual revenue and serves more than 50 clients across 3 states. $100,000. The number hung in the air like a revelation. I could see people in the audience sitting up straighter, whispering to each other. Ms. Carter has also been offered a position with McKinsey & Company, one of the world's most prestigious consulting firms, with a starting salary that places her in the top 5% of our graduates. I caught a glimpse of my parents in the crowd. My father's mouth was literally hanging open. My mother looked like she was trying to process information that didn't compute with everything she thought she knew about me. But perhaps most impressive of all, Dean Richardson continued, is what Ms. Carter chose to do with her success. He paused, building suspense, and I realized he was about to reveal something that I'd only finalized the week before. Ms. Carter has donated $50,000 of her own money to establish the Isabella Carter Scholarship Fund, which will provide annual support to students who, like herself, are pursuing their education without family financial assistance. The crowd erupted. Not polite applause, but a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. I stood there overwhelmed as thousands of people rose to their feet. This scholarship will be awarded annually to a student who demonstrates not just academic excellence, but the kind of resilience, determination, and leadership that Ms. Carter has embodied throughout her time at Northview. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face as I looked out at the crowd. Somewhere in that sea of people, there were probably students who would benefit from that scholarship. Students who were working multiple jobs, living on ramen noodles, wondering if they belonged in places like this. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Richardson concluded, it is my honor to present the inaugural recipient of the Dean's Award for Exemplary Achievement, Isabella Carter. The applause was deafening, but through it all I could hear one voice above the others. Madison, somewhere in the graduating class, was clapping and cheering louder than anyone else. "That's my sister!" I could hear her shouting. "That's my sister!" As I finally walked off the stage, diploma and award in hand, I felt like I was floating. The invisible daughter had not only become visible, but had become impossible to ignore. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Individual names were called, diplomas were handed out, caps were thrown in the air. But I barely registered any of it. I was still processing what had just happened, the way 4 years of hidden struggle had been transformed into public triumph. When the ceremony ended and graduates were reunited with their families, I looked around for my parents. I found them standing about 20 feet away, still looking stunned, talking quietly to each other. They looked like they were arguing about something. Grandma Rosa reached me first. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Mija," she whispered, pulling me into a fierce hug. $50,000. You gave away $50,000 to help other kids like you. It felt right, I said. It felt like the right thing to do. It was more than right. It was beautiful. Mason appeared next, grinning from ear to ear. "Isabella Carter, you magnificent, secretive genius. When were you going to tell me you were making 6 figures?" I wanted to make sure it was sustainable first. I laughed. I didn't want to jinx it. Dr. Park was there too, beaming with pride. I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what just happened on that stage. You didn't just graduate, Isabella. You announced yourself to the world. Madison pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around me. I am so proud of you, she said, tears in her eyes. I have never been prouder to be anyone's sister. Madison, you graduated too. This is your day too. No, she said firmly. Today is your day. You earned this. All of it. Finally, my parents approached. They looked uncertain, almost nervous, like they were meeting me for the first time. Izzy, my mother said quietly. We had no idea. We didn't know about the business, about the scholarship, about any of it. I know, I said simply. But why didn't you tell us? My father asked. Why didn't you let us know what you were accomplishing? It was a fair question, and I thought about it for a moment before answering. Because I needed to do it for me first. I needed to know that I could succeed without your approval, without your recognition, without your investment. I needed to know that I was worth it, even if you didn't. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people finally seeing clearly, after years of looking through fog. We were wrong, my mother said finally. We were so wrong about you. You weren't wrong about Madison, I said. You were just incomplete about me. My father stepped forward, and for the first time in years really looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. I don't know how to apologize for 24 years of being blind, he said. You don't have to apologize, I said. But you do have to see me now. Really see me. I see you, he said quietly. I see you, and I'm amazed by what I see. As the afternoon wore on and the crowds dispersed, I found myself standing alone for a moment in the quad, where I just experienced the most transformative moment of my life. The invisible daughter was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had learned the most important lesson of all. The only approval that truly matters is your own. But the best part, I was just getting started. The celebration dinner that night was unlike any family gathering we'd ever had. My parents had reserved a private dining room at the nicest restaurant in town, originally planned as Madison's celebration. But now they were scrambling to reframe it as a joint celebration, trying to pretend they'd always seen both daughters equally. We should order champagne, my father said, his voice a little too bright, to celebrate both our graduates. Both our successful graduates, my mother added, emphasizing the word both, like she was trying to convince herself. I watched them attempt to rewrite history in real time. Suddenly, they remembered achievements of mine they'd barely acknowledged. The honor roll mentions the scholarships, the late nights I'd spent studying. I always knew you were destined for great things, my mother said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Even when you were little, you had this determination. The irony wasn't lost on me. The determination they were now praising was the same quality they'd once dismissed as stubbornness. The independence they were now celebrating was the same trait they'd once used to justify neglecting me. Madison sat quietly through most of the dinner, watching our parents try to rebuild their narrative. Finally, she spoke up. Mom, Dad, stop. Just stop. They looked at her surprised. You can't just pretend the last 24 years didn't happen. You can't rewrite history because you're suddenly proud of Izzy. Madison, my father started, but she held up her hand. Izzy succeeded despite you, not because of you. The least you can do is acknowledge that. The table fell silent. My parents looked uncomfortable but didn't argue. They knew she was right. After dinner, we all walked outside together. The evening air was warm and the parking lot was lit by string lights from the restaurant's patio. It should have been a perfect ending to a perfect day. But there was still something unfinished between us. Izzy, my mother said as we reached our cars, I hope you know that we love you. We've always loved you. I know you love me, I said quietly. But love and support aren't the same thing. Love and seeing aren't the same thing. We want to do better, my father said. We want to be the parents you deserved. I looked at them, these people who had shaped my life in ways they'd never intended, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not resentment, but a kind of peaceful acceptance. You raised the daughter you wanted, I said calmly. I became the woman you needed to see. The words hung in the air between us. Not angry, not bitter, just true. I don't need you to be different parents now. I need you to be parents who can see who I actually am. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We see you now. Good, I said, simply. That's all I ever wanted. Grandma Rosa stepped forward and took my arm. Come on, Mija, let's go celebrate with people who have always seen you. Mason and Kayla were waiting by Grandma's car, both of them grinning like they'd just watched the best movie of their lives. Isabella Carter, Mason said, shaking his head in amazement. You are officially the most impressive person I know. We knew you were special, Kayla added, but $100,000 business, a scholarship fund, girl, you've been holding out on us. As we started to walk away, I heard footsteps behind me. Madison caught up to us slightly out of breath. Can I come with you guys? She asked. I want to celebrate with the people who actually celebrate each other. I smiled and linked my arm through hers. Of course. We ended up at a little ice cream shop near campus, the five of us squeezed into a booth meant for four, laughing and talking until they closed. Grandma Rosa told embarrassing stories about me as a child. Mason and Kayla shared their favorite memories from college. Madison apologized again for all the years we'd lost to our parents' favoritism. You know what the crazy thing is, Madison said as we finally prepared to leave. I spent my whole life trying to live up to their expectations, and you spent your whole life exceeding them. Guess which one of us is happier? As we walked back to our cars, I reflected on everything that had led to this moment. The Christmas mornings when I'd felt invisible, the dinner where they'd chosen Madison over me, the late nights working multiple jobs, the early mornings studying in the library, the moment I'd decided to stop waiting for their approval and start building my own life. You know what I realized today? I said to the group. Being overlooked was my greatest gift. They all looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I'm serious. Think about it. Madison got all the attention, all the support, all the expectations. But expectations are just another word for limitations. They expected her to succeed in a very specific way, so that's the only way she knew how to try. I paused, organizing my thoughts. But nobody expected anything from me. Nobody was watching me closely enough to tell me what I couldn't do. So I got to figure out what I could do. I got to become whoever I wanted to become. That's a very zen way of looking at parental neglect, Mason said, but he was smiling. I'm not saying it didn't hurt. It did, but that hurt became fuel. Every time they dismissed me, every time they chose Madison over me, every time they acted like I was tough enough to handle things alone, I got stronger. I got more determined. I got more resourceful. Grandma Rosa squeezed my hand. You got more yourself. Exactly. Being overlooked taught me that the only person who needs to believe in me is me. And once you learn that lesson, once you really internalize it, you become unstoppable. We reached our cars and I turned to look back at the restaurant where my parents were probably still sitting, trying to process the daughter they'd never really seen before today. They gave Madison everything they thought she needed to succeed. But they gave me something better. They gave me the fire to be undeniable. As I drove home that night, I thought about the little girl who had sat in her room with a Stanford acceptance letter, feeling invisible and unworthy. I thought about the teenager who had been told she was an investment that wouldn't pay off. I thought about the young woman who had worked 40 hours a week to pay for her own education. That little girl, that teenager, that young woman, had become someone extraordinary. Not despite being overlooked, but because of it. Tomorrow I would start my job at McKinsey & Company. I would continue growing my business. I would mentor the first recipient of the Isabella Carter Scholarship. I would build the life I'd always dreamed of. But tonight, I was just grateful. Grateful for the journey that had brought me here. Grateful for the people who had seen me when I couldn't see myself. Grateful for the parents who had unknowingly given me the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that I didn't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. Being overlooked had been my greatest gift. It had given me the fire to be undeniable. And now, finally, I was burning bright enough for everyone to see. Sometimes the best revenge is just becoming everything they never saw coming. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, drop a comment and share your story. And if you want more tales of quiet strength turning into loud success, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.